overnight that changed your family completely? What if you didn't know if your children were alive or dead? If they had been kidnapped or had tragically burned in a horrible house fire? Hello again, I'm Michael, an assistant librarian at Scott County Public Library in beautiful Georgetown, Kentucky. Thank you for joining me with another episode of Unsolved Mysteries, where we look at some of the most baffling cases in recent history. Today we are looking at the details surrounding the Sodder Family tragedy, a baffling case which is truly heartbreaking. Let me give you some of the background on the family. The Sodder family was a large, well-respected family in Fayetteville, West Virginia, a small town of about 1,300 people at the time. The family was a large one. George and Jenny Sodder had a total of 10 kids between the years of 1923 and 1943. Yes, 10 kids. They lived in a spacious two-story wood frame house about 4 miles from town. The town had an active Italian community, and George was known as being rather opinionated, often getting into arguments with people in his community. He had immigrated here from Italy and was especially critical of Benito Mussolini, the leader of the National Fascist Party in Italy in 1944. One day a man was trying to sell George some insurance, which George declined. He didn't need any life insurance. And the man got angry and started yelling at him. "Your GD house is going to go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to pay for all the dirty remarks that you made about Mussolini." Well, George dismissed the comments as ones made in the heat of an argument and thought no more about it. But let's look at what happened that one fateful night. 9 of the 10 family members were home that night. The eldest son, Joe, was stationed away in the Army. It was Christmas Eve, 1945, and they had all exchanged presents, and by all accounts it had a wonderful, wonderful family evening together. By 10:30, George and Jenny were ready for bed, but several of the children wanted to stay up late. Betty, 6, Jenny, 8, Louis, 10, Martha, 12, and Maurice, 14 years old, were granted permission to stay up as long as they had done their chores, turned off the lights, closed the curtains, and locked the doors. John, 23 years old, George Jr., 16, Marion, 17, and the youngest one, Sylvie, just 2, the little baby girl, all headed to bed. So in other words, all the older children went off to bed, the younger children stayed up there in the house. The mom, Jenny, was awakened by the phone at 12:30, where George and Sylvie had also been sleeping. She went to the hallway, picked up the phone, and was met with an unfamiliar female voice, in which she heard like glass tinkling and laughter in the background, kind of a party atmosphere. The woman asked for an unfamiliar name, started laughing, and hung up. She noticed that the lights were still on in the living room, the curtains were still open, the door unlocked, but Miriam was on the couch, so Jenny didn't worry too much about that, and so Jenny went on to bed. Just as she started to fall asleep, she heard a thump on the roof and a rolling sound, as if a rubber ball had been tossed onto the roof and rolled off. She didn't think too much about it and went back to sleep. At 1:30, however, she awakened again to a strange smell and noticed smoke rolling into the house. She woke George, grabbed up Sylvie, and rushed out of the house while yelling for the other kids. A head count of the children revealed that the 3 eldest children and Sylvie were the only ones outside of the house. The youngest children were still in the inferno. George did everything in his power to rescue the younger kids. He tried breaking a window and got himself all cut up, but he couldn't get upstairs because the staircase was engulfed in flames. He ran around the house to get his ladder, but strangely, it wasn't where he left it. He tried to move one of his large coal trucks so he could get up to one of the upper windows and save the kids, but neither of the 2 trucks would start, even though he had just used them the day before. The trapped children gave no response from the upstairs. When he tried calling the fire department, the phones weren't working. The fire chief was eventually located, however, using a phone tree, and the fire department members notified each other. But no one showed up until 8 o'clock the next morning. The fire was at 1:30, No one showed up till 8:30. Even though the firemen had been told that there were children still trapped in the inferno, no one showed up till 8 o'clock. George and Ginny watched their house burn to the ground in less than an hour. There was nothing they could do. Police and firemen tried to investigate and recover the remains of the children. The cause of the fire was labeled faulty wiring, even though it had recently been inspected and found to have no issues. The family remembered seeing the Christmas lights still on as the flames engulfed the house, so it was not an electrical fire. But the real baffling fact about this case is this: no remains of the children were ever found. Devastated, 2 days later, George made a memorial to the children on the site. And even though there were no remains, the children's cause of death was listed as suffocation. Even though there were no bodies, the children were labeled deceased. So let's look at all the strange things that led up to this fire that night. The salesman who threatened the children in the house, a random guy looking for a job mentioning a faulty fuse box despite the house getting an all clear just a few months earlier, a strange man who had been watching the children get on and off the bus and on their way home each afternoon, a random phone call the night of the fire, the loud thump that Ginny heard on the roof, probably something like a Molotov cocktail in my opinion, the phone's not working, the missing ladder, the trucks wouldn't start. All those things led into a very tragic evening. The Register Herald, the local paper, reported the telephone line to the Sodders' home had been intentionally cut. Since it was Christmas Day, the police did not do a more thorough search. What would be the use? What would be the point? The damage was done, the children were gone. So it makes you wonder, were the police part of some kind of cruel cover-up? The trusty ladder was found down an embankment, more than 75 feet from where it was supposed to be kept. As the investigation continued, only 4 vertebrae were found. You would expect there to be full skeletons of the 5 missing children. After all, the fire wouldn't burn up all the bones too. The 4 vertebrae were eventually linked to a nearby cemetery and were not any of the bones of the missing Sodder children. And get this, the vertebrae had been placed there by the police in an effort to provide a false sense of closure for the family. A bus driver said he had seen fireballs being thrown onto the house. Again, probably Molotov cocktails. A waitress at a diner 50 miles away says she served breakfast to the children and several adults the morning after the fire. But when she tried to engage the children in conversation, the adults started speaking Italian, got very hostile toward her, and rushed the children out of the diner. A local teenager says she saw the children in a car leaving the area with unknown adults at about the time of the fire. George and Ginny became convinced that their 5 children did not perish in the fire, and foul play must be involved. They put up a reward and missing signs. The signs actually stayed up until Ginny died, 20 years after George. Rumors still circulate to this day as to the whereabouts of the 5 missing Sodder children. The Sodders received a letter from a woman in St. Louis claiming that Martha was in a convent there. In Texas, a barfly was sure he heard people talking about setting a Christmas Eve fire in West Virginia on Christmas Eve, but nah, I don't think so. In Florida, the children were supposedly staying with Jenny's relatives. 22 years after the fire, a picture supposedly surfaced of Lewis Sodder as an adult. The picture was mailed from Central City, Kentucky, with no return address. But the man in the picture could never be found. So, did the 5 children perish in the fire? Or was the fire designed to hide a kidnapping? George and Ginny died thinking their 5 children were out there somewhere. If they were, they never escaped their captors and never returned home to the Sodder family. I personally don't think the fate of the missing 5 children will ever be solved. Are they still around, not knowing the facts of their early childhood? But like Sylvie, the toddler who is grown now, She's 78 years old now. She has said, well, it's never too late to investigate. Join me next time for another unexplained mystery. Until then, on behalf of the Scott County Public Library in Georgetown, Kentucky, this is Michael. Have a great day.